Welcome to Debate the News True Crime. I'm Joseph Labasco, joined by my co-host Adrian Barker and our special guest host Angie, aka Angie's World. Tonight we're revisiting the terrifying saga of a possible serial killer, the I-70 Strangler. A quick note before we continue, tonight's episode involves discussions of extremely violent crimes and graphic details of murder, which some listeners may find disturbing. Listener discretion is advised. If you or somebody you know needs support, help may be available via the Crisis Lifeline by dialing 988. Adrian, Angie, and I are not law enforcement officers, attorneys, or forensic experts. We research each case thoroughly, but the show is recorded live with little to no editing. Any factual inaccuracies are unintentional. And of course, any individuals we discuss who haven't been convicted of a crime are presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. The opinions of our guests and audience members are their own and don't necessarily reflect the views of myself, Adrian, Angie, or Debate the News.
I'm Adrian Barker. The story of the I-70 Strangler plays out like a dark mystery on the highways of America's heartland. Imagine, throughout the 1980s, young men start vanishing from Indianapolis's gay nightlife scene, only for their bodies to be found discarded in rural ditches and streams near the interstate. By 1991, the killings suddenly stopped without warning. Who was the I-70 Strangler, and why did the murders end?
What's up? This is your girl Angie, aka Angie's World, and I'm back again with Joseph and Adrian as a guest co-host. In our Fox Hollow Farms Murders episode, we dived into Herb Baumeister's crimes in the 1990s. Baumeister's story raised the theory that his murderous trail might have started long before Fox Hollow, possibly as the I-70 Strangler. Could the same man have been operating unnoticed for over a decade?
This is Debate the News True Crime. Let's get into it.
On June 16, 1980, the body of 15-year-old Michael S. Petrie was found in rural Hamilton County, Indiana, near Interstate 70. He had been strangled. Petrie's murder was the first in what would become a harrowing pattern. Over the next decade, several young men, most in their teens or 20s, turned up dead in central Indiana and western Ohio, all in remote areas not far from I-70. The victims were typically found naked or partially clothed, dumped in streams, ditches, or along country roads, and every one of them had been strangled. Throughout the 1980s, the grim toll grew. In October 1982, 14-year-old Delvoyd Baker, the youngest victim, disappeared from downtown Indianapolis and was later found strangled in a ditch in Fishers, Indiana. In May 1983, Michael Riley, 22, was last spotted leaving a popular club with an unknown man. A week later, Riley's body was found in a rural ditch, strangled with what appeared to be a towel or cloth ligature. By the mid-1980s, the killer had expanded beyond Indiana and into western Ohio. Eric Roker, 17, vanished in 1985 and was found by a creek across the state line in Preble County, Ohio. In 1986, Michael Glenn, 29, was discovered in a ditch near Eaton, Ohio, identified only years later via fingerprints. Throughout the late 80s and early 90s, more bodies kept appearing. James Robbins, 21, in 87, John Paul Talbot, 26, in 1989, and Stephen Elliott, 26, also in 1989. All of them were strangled and dumped near I-70. In August of 1990, Clay Boatman, 32, left a Richmond, Indiana gay bar and never came home. His strangled body was found in an Ohio ditch days later. The final known I-70 Strangler victim was discovered on October 7, 1991, when 42-year-old Otto Gary Becker was found in a ditch off a gravel road in Henry County, Indiana. Witnesses reported seeing Becker that day in a car on I-70 with two other men, one allegedly holding him down in the back seat. But police were never able to identify those suspects. After Becker's death in 1991, the killings suddenly stopped. Or at least there were no longer bodies turning up along the interstate. Years earlier, in 1982, amid a string of similar homicides, the Indianapolis Police Department had formed a task force of 8 officers dedicated to the killings. The FBI joined in 1983. Several initial suspects emerged, but ultimately led nowhere. At this point, authorities have been chasing a shadow for over a decade, an unidentified serial killer the media dubbed the I-70 Strangler. But they still had no name and no face for the murderer. By the late 80s, some in law enforcement wondered if the I-70 Strangler might actually be the work of another known killer. One theory centered around Larry Eiler, the convicted highway killer who was on death row for a series of murders of young men in Indianapolis and Illinois in the early 80s, but his profile and MO did not match that of the I-70 Strangler. In 1994, after Eiler died in prison, his attorney revealed a list of victims that Eiler had confessed to killing. Notably, none of the I-70 Strangler's known victims were among them. By the early 1990s, the I-70 Strangler case remained officially unsolved. But in Indianapolis' gay community, men were still mysteriously disappearing. It would later emerge that Herb Baumeister, a seemingly normal local business owner and family man, was frequenting the Indianapolis gay bars under an alias and luring men back to his isolated farmhouse estate. By 1995, private investigators and missing persons detectives had also honed in on Baumeister. In June 1996, investigators descended on Baumeister's estate in Westfield, Indiana. What they found was almost beyond imagination. Scattered across the wooded grounds behind the house were thousands of human bone fragments. Over the course of 2 weeks, searchers uncovered skeletal remains from at least 8 different individuals. The remains corresponded to some of the men who had disappeared in recent years from Indianapolis. However, Baumeister himself was nowhere to be found. Learning that the net was closing in, Herb had fled the state of Indiana. In July 1996, just 1 month after the bone fragments were discovered, Baumeister's body was found at Pinery Provincial Park in Ontario, Canada, an apparent suicide by gunshot. In his suicide note, Baumeister made no confession or mention of the murders. He instead blamed stress and financial problems for driving him to take his own life. With the suspect dead, prosecutors never got the chance to formally charge him, but the evidence was overwhelming, and Herb Baumeister had been unmasked as the Fox Hollow Farm serial killer. Investigators noted that the I-70 murder stopped right after Baumeister purchased Fox Hollow Farms in 1991, supporting the theory that Baumeister may have also been responsible for the I-70 Strangler killings. However, as far as we know, no physical evidence has ever directly tied him to the highway murders, and there were no fingerprints or DNA linking him to those crime scenes. While many in law enforcement came to believe that Baumeister was the I-70 Strangler, the case remains officially unsolved to this day. So a lot of people think that it's Baumeister. So I want to ask the question, based on the little bit that we just shared, how convinced are you that Baumeister was in fact the I-70 Strangler?
How convinced am I? I don't know. Because it could be him starting out as a baby murderer, doing these murders in his car, and then he moved over to his house. Because once the Fox Hollow murders started, this series of murders on the highway ended. It says no publicly disclosed forensic ties exist. Which is odd because now that we have forensics, they were able to identify some of the bodies at Fox Hollow Farms. I mean, I don't know. They could still get his DNA from his wife, and he had children and stuff like that. So I don't know. Good question.
Yeah, I'm not convinced one way or another. I think they should be able to at least establish one DNA link before I'm going to believe that it was him. Because I think sometimes it can be convenient for a jurisdiction to say, okay, we believe that this cluster of serial killer murders that we never solved were this person, but they're dead, so let's move on.
So we had mentioned this stat before in one of the episodes that the FBI estimates that there's between 25 and 50 active serial killers. Now, looking at the I-70 Strangler and then Herb Baumeister, Joseph, so they were different methods. They targeted different victims. So is a thought that he changed the way he was operating, and how rare is that? I can't see that taking place. What I say is that it was another serial killer, and not surprising because if there are 50 at any given time in the United States, that would make, in my mind, almost like one per state.
I would think that if the same serial killer is operating on their own 18-acre property where they know they're probably not going to get discovered or caught, they're going to dispose of their victims' bodies and maybe change their MO compared to if they're killing people in a car off of a public highway.
I agree with Joseph too. Like, it could be that he expanded his way of killing people. Maybe he got a taste of killing that way. And then he's like, you know what? It's cramped here in the car. Who knows? You know what I mean? But like Joseph said, they don't really change their methodology. Serial killers. Listen, I don't know.
Well, Baumeister died by suicide, right, in 1996 as the police were investigating him. Sometimes I just can't help it to wonder if it's just easier to have a case stay partially open and not have to work on it again if you think that one of the suspects just killed himself. So I don't know, but I would love to see the case files.
I'm looking here and okay, he killed someone located in a ditch wearing underwear with ligature marks from strangulation. I do see some similarities with these victims. And so I'm just looking at the pattern of the murders. Like Michael McRiley was last seen leaving Broad Ripple nightclub with the guy. Days later, he's found nude in a ditch. There are some similarities to Herb Baumeister going to the club, meeting these guys, bringing them back to his property, strangulation.
And they were gay men or men in the LGBTQ plus community. So that I think lends itself to Herb Baumeister because the I-70 killer picked up victims they believe in gay bars. That's how Herb Baumeister picked people up. Like Angie mentioned, the strangulation method was very similar between both cases. So that's kind of why I lean towards him because that's a very specific demographic. And I find it hard to believe that there's just all these gay serial killers running around the Midwest in the 80s and 90s. But who knows?
So now I'm kind of leaning towards what you were saying, you and Angie. Wow. Either way, though, this is so sad for the families. I think the hardest thing with these true crime cases are the ones where the mother, the brother, the sisters, the friends, the aunts and uncles, where is their closure with this kind of killing?
That's true. I was thinking about that. That leads to my next question, closing the case or keeping it open, right? Even though the main suspect is dead, should law enforcement continue to devote resources to the I-70 Strangler case, or should these resources be shifted to focus on other unsolved cases?
I think it's difficult, right? Because police only have a certain amount of resources, only a certain amount of manpower. So they need to pick and choose what they're going to dedicate their resources towards. So I would say that they should continue to try to at least create a definitive link between a perpetrator and these victims.
I think there's definitely a big case for family members to speak up, speak out, mail those letters, do whatever you need to do. If it's important enough for you and your family that you want that case open, make it happen, work it. It's many years, and sometimes, it's easy to forget the cases and the boxes down in the basement. I hate to say it that way.
Thank you, Adrian. So my opinion is that they should still keep them open because there are 4 cold cases here in Utah alone dating back to 1973. Douglas Brick, Tanya Weaver, 1965, Jason Reuter, 2005, and Christine Gallegos, 1985. All of these people went missing and turned up dead. With investigative genetic genealogy, they were able to identify someone as a suspect in one case. They used DNA from one of Douglas Brick's relatives and confirmed just this year that the remains belong to him. And so, as a mom and a sister and as a daughter, granddaughter, I would like my family, if anything happened to me, that they would continue to search for me. Or if I had a family member in that situation, I would make sure that the case was kept open. One of the cases here in Utah, the family kept the case open in their own way because they wanted to have closure and they got it. They finally got it. Thank you.
Amazing information, Mama Kay. Thank you for this share. That's awesome.
Yeah, no, I'm gonna second that. I definitely think that they should leave it open because, there's still family members out there that, are alive that want justice for their family members. And so they deserve that. And I also want to say shout out to the chatter community. And she tapped in. She says, I think they should keep the cases open for the sake of the families. And then she tapped into Mama Kay's point, who spoke previously. Technology and tools continue to improve, and there is hope for future identification. So, shout out to the chatter community and the chat.
Thank you, Angie, and thank you, Anne. Love having you in the room. So let's just go over, Joseph, if you don't mind. So when a case is closed, is it like always closed, like that's it, they never open it up? Or when they say case closed, it can be open if there's circumstances that would allow them to want to reopen the case. Am I correct with that?
That is a great question. I don't actually know the answer. I think that a cold case technically is just they've ran down every single credible lead that they have and they just haven't gotten anywhere.
Well, I asked our lovely friend AI, and it is an interesting thing. A cold case is an open and unsolved criminal investigation where all initial leads have been exhausted, while a closed case typically means an investigation has been concluded with a final judgment or order. All right, that helped me to understand. Hopefully, that puts a little clarity for all of us when we're talking about these two, closed or cold. Interesting.
And the great thing about it is that there's always detectives that are willing to look into the unsolved cases and work on them. I'm a very spiritual person, and I believe that God puts things into people, and some of these detectives, even brand new detectives that are young, they decide to go wherever they keep all the files on the cold cases and start looking through things and snooping around again and not giving up on these people and their families. And, there's always hope for cases like this to be solved, even if so many years pass.
I also think that it feels weird that you would have a murderer running around the streets. Like, I think just as human beings, when we hear these cases, we want them to be solved. We don't want anyone else getting hurt. It's just so hard to understand how someone could take a life and then they got away with murder. That doesn't feel good. So I know that all of us don't like that idea that that person is still out there. Let's hope that they are dead and whoever they are, that they faced some kind of penalty in their life.
Exactly, Adrian. And I think that another challenge could be DNA technology at the time of these murders is nowhere near what it is now, or even what it was in the late 90s. So I think that the protocols they probably followed with collecting the evidence and the samples is a lot different than what it would be today. So they may not have DNA samples. You know what I mean? Like they weren't thinking in the 80s, oh, we need this type of a sample so we can test it. That technology came later. So they kind of have to work backwards with what they have to get matches.
Agreed. Mariana, what is your thoughts?
I really don't know this case. I'm listening and learning. But yeah, definitely a very sad case where young people loses their life for no reason. Like somebody just decided to go kill people for fun. Seems pretty sad.
Yeah. You have a dozen or more people who were murdered in such a callous way and just dumped off the side of a freeway. So, regardless of who was responsible and how it happened, it's horrible.
So true.
This has been a tough case, but I think that there's not much more we could do. But we can remind you to keep your eyes open and be vigilant.
Yes, for sure.
Yes, absolutely. And the FBI and the police have stated that they do believe that it was Herb Baumeister. So sometimes, you know what? It may just be that simple that it was Herb Baumeister and this case is closed. But we've retraced the steps of a killer who moved in silence along America's interstate, targeting those who might not be missed by society at a time. Without a trial or definitive proof, this case lingers in a gray area of uncertainty. Tonight, as we reflect on the victims, Michael, Maurice, Delvoid, Michael Riley, Eric, Mike Glenn, James, John Paul, Stephen, Clay, Thomas, and Otto, we remember that they were sons, brothers, and friends. They had hopes and futures that were stolen away in senseless acts of violence.
This case forces us to confront some difficult realities, and it highlights how crucial it is to treat every missing person's report with urgency, no matter the victim's background. Back in the 1980s, biases and communication gaps may have allowed a serial killer or possibly killers to slip through the cracks. We'd like to believe that today things have improved, that investigators are more collaborative and more sensitive to the vulnerabilities of communities. The I-70 Strangler case also shows us the importance of persistence. Decades later, advancements in forensic science might still bring new clues to light. And perhaps one day, DNA technology or a discovered piece of evidence could conclusively link these crimes to a perpetrator. Until then, we're left with a cautious conclusion based on what evidence we do have. And it's a reminder that in true crime, real life doesn't always wrap up neatly like a TV show.
Our hearts go out to the families and friends of all the victims we discussed tonight. For those families, the pain of loss is compounded by decades of uncertainty. We hope that by keeping these stories in the spotlight, we honor the memory of their loved ones and perhaps inch closer to the truth.
Here on Debate the News True Crime, our goal isn't just to recount crimes, it is to spark these conversations. And who knows, even long dormant cases can find new life with dedicated attention and merging technology. I'd like to thank everyone here. Thank you so much. Mariana, thank you for speaking. Angie's World. Angie, I just don't even know what to say. You are wonderful.
We love Angie, aka Angie's World, and she will be back soon for another episode. You always bring a great perspective, and we love having you here.
Thank you, and I love being here. Thank you so much.
Until next time, I'm Joseph Labosco.
And my name is Angie, aka Angie's World.
I'm Adrienne Barker. Special thanks to everyone. Special thanks to Angie. Please, everyone, don't walk alone at night. Find a buddy, call an Uber. Let's all stay safe together. Thank you so much and good night.